Who are you and what have you written?
My name is Jennifer Boresz Engelking. I'm a local author. I grew up in Lake County, and I've written The Hidden History of Lake County, Ohio, and Lost Lake County, Ohio. And my third book is coming out in October, and it is Lost Lake Erie. And they're all published by the History Press and Arcadia Publishing.
All right. I want to start with buried treasure.
Okay.
I always want to start with buried treasure.
Of course.
It happens
that
to
makes
work in
sense.
this case.
Yes.
Are there stolen gold bars buried in Lake County?
You know, the legend is that there are stolen bars, nearly $1 million in stolen bars that were hidden by bank robbers from Canada along the Grand River. It's legend. Is there actual fact? I didn't come across it. I came across some great stories. We can't say, but many people have searched for it. And of course, they did find a body. They found a skull that could have been one of the robbers, matched a possible location. So, you know, here's the thing though, Jason. If someone who searched for it found it, what would they do? Would they go and, you know, notify everyone of it? Or would they, it might be something they keep to themselves, so we may never know for sure.
They would build a money pit.
Right, yeah.
It's the only reasonable thing
Yes,
to do.
keep their gold bars.
Speaking of buried things that we talk about in Lost Lake County, Ohio.
Yes.
Let's talk chemicals.
Chemicals, the Ohio Rubber Company, right?
Yeah, what is lewisite and what does it have to do with Lake County?
So it was a poisonous gas that was being created in Lake County without residents knowing in Willoughby. It was the building that became the Ohio Rubber Company. People can now see the DeMilta water tower from Vine Street. And it was a plant that military was bringing people from all over the country to come here and produce lewisite that they were planning to use in the war. And it was just about at the point where it was going to be used when the war ended, and it was disposed of, and supposedly it was dumped in the ocean. It was dumped, in local rivers in Lake Erie. Some stories say that people found them in the building in elevator shafts, canisters of this poisonous gas. And all the while, they picked Willoughby thinking it would be off the radar for German spies who might be looking for that kind of facility that existed in the United States. So they picked the quiet town of Willoughby.
Now, I have kicked this interview off without the slightest bit of context, and I apologize for that. But both the stolen gold, the perhaps apocryphal lewisite,
right.
All of these are things you wrote about in Lost Lake County, Ohio. So as you tell people these stories, what are people's reaction when they learn about the buried treasures or the chemical weapons?
It's fun to see their reaction because it's how I felt when I found out about them. For me, the excitement is researching and digging up these stories and having lived here my whole life and not just learning about them now. So yeah, the reaction's surprise and shock and excitement, like really this existed? I love the writing process, but it's so fun that initial discovering a story like that and not knowing that something like that existed here is what is really exciting for me. And I find these stories, I find them sometimes in libraries, which is amazing, and in old books. I find them in historical societies. Sometimes they are quite literally crumbling papers that have been in file cabinets that no one has touched for years, which for me, that's like treasure. It's like a gold mine. Here are all these photos and trying to piece together the details on the back of a photo and the story that it could have gone to. So that's the most fun part for me is digging up these gems of stories.
Your book also explores a different kind of lost history, not just lost treasure.
Right.
The sort of history that we lose when a community changes over time.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the changes that you investigated, that you learned about during your research?
I guess to back up a little bit. So there are the History Press and Arcadia Publishing. They have a series of books that exist across the country. They exist in different cities and counties. And so Hidden History, their series, so Hidden History of Lake County, Ohio, focuses on the story, I always say the story behind the story of places we know, or that exist in some form. And then Lost is places that are gone, industries that are gone. So it is interesting when you talk about lost industries to see how much has evolved over the years. This area, we know that we are by the lake, of course, with our name Lake County, and it's a big part of who we are today with recreation. But it used to be in the early days, like in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, it was such a big part of how Lake County was formed, with amusement parks that I think many people didn't know existed that lined the shore. They were in Willowick and Menor, Painesville, like all these lake towns. And we still have the lake. In many cases, the beaches are gone or they've eroded and there's remnants that are left. But it brought people in. It brought people to the area. It gave Lake County a name. So it's interesting to see how industries like that form Lake County, even though they aren't physically still here. Like, these are places that are gone, but they played such an important role in who we are today as a county and the industries that we now have.
How do you research lost history?
A lot of my research starts with, a few stories or with an idea of knowing that there's a lot of industry that I want to look into. And for Lost Lake County in particular, I had stories left over from Hidden History of Lake County because I'd never written a book. I've been writing for years. I'd never written a book. And I was so excited finding all these stories that I wanted to put everything in. So I learned with that first book how to organize my work better. The first one I just was like writing. This all needs to go in. And then I got to the end and I realized I was way over. And that's when I realized that there was another title from my publisher that would work, which would be the Lost Lake County book. So some of those stories came from that book. And then some of them I talk to people and find out family history in the area, or sometimes it starts with a photo. Like I said, looking in an archive and seeing there's a photo of a baseball team at Willow Beach. And I didn't know they had a baseball team. And then it evolves. And then I start researching based on that photo, or vice versa. Sometimes it's a story, a really obscure story that I find in an old book that I've never heard of and is really off the radar, and either found it in a historical society or a library. And then I try to contact that area and match it up with a photo if I can. And I think from my background was in news years ago, and I got really used to knowing that stories changed, that you start with an idea of what a story is, but you let it evolve based on your interview and based on what you find. So a lot of my book, it changes and evolves as I'm writing it.
Now, you've mentioned previously that one of the things you like to do as part of your research process is go to the locations.
Yes.
Not even just read about them extensively or talk to people who were there. You like to be in the physical place.
Yes.
Why is that helpful?
I think it's helpful because you sometimes see things that you didn't know were there. For example, Willow Beach. Willow Beach Park Association still exists in Willowick, and that is one of the initial stories that really got me wanting to write a book, because it was from the area I grew up in. And I knew that there was an amusement park there, and learned that there was still a remnant. There was a pavilion that still exists there. And they were kind enough to let me, I'd been there as a kid and I hadn't been back in years. They let me go there and kind of wander around. And I found just interesting things why is there this big rectangular piece of cement? And they're we use that the kids play basketball and they ride their bikes and stuff. I'm but it's just an odd place for it. So I ended up looking at old maps, and I'm almost positive from looking and comparing different years that it was where the original dance pavilion was. And over the years, it had maybe been repaired because it ended in the 1920s. So if you think about it, it's a long time ago, but it's not. It could have just been kept up. And then old light fixtures that I think were original. So I think by going to the location, sometimes it's all gone. And even if it's all gone, you still at least get a feel for where it was located, what was around it, what was geographically around it, how close was it to the lake or various other landmarks. And I just think that all helps in writing and being able to delve into detail a bit more.
Do you have a favorite story that you discovered when you were researching Lost Lake County, Ohio?
That's so tough, because I always say if I put it in, because there's so many, if it makes it into the book, then they really are all, stories that I find fascinating. It's really tough to pick a favorite because they're so varied that I like them all for different reasons. So no, I don't have one singular story that I could pick out.
What other local history books do you recommend after you've read Hidden Lake County and Lost Lake County, Ohio?
Oh gosh, there's so many. A little bit of Perry history is great. That was by Jack Kless edited, and Mary Platko wrote that. Mark Bona's Hidden History of Cleveland Sports is a fun book. Deanna Adams writes a lot of really fun rock and roll Cleveland history. I took her class at Lakeland this was years ago after I was coming back from working in broadcasting and knew that I wanted to write a book, and I took her how to write a book class. And so we stayed in contact and became friends, and so she's been really instrumental in connecting me with the same editor that she's written books for. And her books are just fascinating and amazing, and she's a great person. I feel like there's so many, I know I'm gonna miss a bunch of them. Of course, there's the Images of America series, like Willoughby Menor. The Concord Township one is new. So yeah, tons of good books.
What's next for you? I know you mentioned it in passing at the beginning, but please, by all means.
So yeah, I have just finished. I sent in Lost Lake Erie, which I've always lived in Lake County, except when I was away reporting for a few years. And I've always been close to the lake. Even when I was away, I was in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I was in Toledo. So I've just kind of coasted along the shore of Lake Erie. And that's part of it, is not only did I grow up by the lake and I went to Cleveland State, but I picked up some stories and knowledge of those areas while I was in Toledo in broadcasting and in Erie. Since it's part of the Lost series, I'm trying to focus on industries and things that you might not know about the lake. There are some shipwrecks, there are some things you would expect in a lake book, but there was a huge hotel that was on Put-in-Bay, and it was the Victory Hotel, and it actually rivaled the Grand Hotel on Mackinac. It was larger than it at the time, which most people don't know about. So that was really fun to write. And again, with my first book, I have a lot of stories that I'm saving for a possible hidden history of Lake Erie that I hope to write. And that, it's fun, the Hidden History series, you can get a little bit more into, the Lake Erie monster and some legends and stuff like that, and peel back some of the layers. And then I also am hoping to try my hand at some fiction. I've started writing some Lake County-based fiction. Actually started a couple years ago, and I've gone back and forth, so hopefully we'll see that at some point too.
Wonderful. Last question, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Just I think I appreciate the library so much, being able to transfer books from different areas, being able to come in and research, that has saved me so much. I've gotten books from Conneaut thanks to the transfer system and the librarians and the knowledge that we have here in Lake County. And I just think we're really lucky to be in Lake County. Truly, it's not only a really unique area because of where we are situated with the history of Prohibition, the Underground Railroad, all these industries that we've talked about. But I think people stay here and they raise their families and they really care about it. So for me, that's really exciting to do these stories and have people say thank you for putting my grandpa in this. Thank you for saving some of this that feels like it's being lost or that people didn't know about. So it's fun for me to research. I love that part. I love to hold the book when it's done. That's exciting. And the writing process is just a part of me. I've always loved writing, but that's really what makes it really special to me, is when I'm out at a book event or a book talk and someone tells me about how much it means to them and that they feel like it's a piece of saved history. So that makes it all worthwhile.